Hi, my name is Joe Taylor. You don't know me. I've never published a book, and I'm not considered a thought leader, but I do have some extensive time in customer retention, devoting years to trying to retain customers for a business. And there's some things that have become very clear to me over time that I wanted to share because I think if you're interested in growing your business, you'll find them interesting. So in regard to churn, people talk about it a lot. It's in the news. It's a subject. If you look at an EBSCO title search, what you'll see is that over the past 10 years, articles with the phrase customer retention in the title outnumber the articles with customer acquisition in the title by about 4 to 1. Now, if you go back 5 or 10 years, those numbers are reversed. So it's clear there's been some change in the interest in these two subjects. And you see articles like the one from Forbes, "Customer is King." You see articles in Marketing Week that say the marketing focus is shifting from acquisition to retention. And in the trade magazines, like here's one from Auto Body Repair. And if you look in the plumbing, electrical, whatever, they all have this kind of thing, like you need to retain your customers. So if there's a lot of interest in this, how's it really playing out in the world? So let's take a look at this Marketing Week article in a little more detail. So this Marketing Week article noted a shift from acquisition focus to retention focus. And they said, well, the budget is, the marketing budget is distributed evenly across the buyer journey. But did you notice something? That the order in which they've put these steps in the buying journey, they're sorted in the article, but from high to low based upon the percentage that's applied to that step. And so the normal order is we start with discover, and then we go to learn, then we go to try, buy, and we've got the percentages for each of these steps, and then we go to use and advocate. If you look at the percentages, though, allocated to each of these steps, well, and what steps are acquisition versus what's retention? So if you look at it, 73% of the budget is spent on acquisition. So despite the fact that we say the interest is shifting from one to the other, our marketing budgets still largely go, 3 to 1, still goes to acquisition rather than retention. So, why is there this disconnect? Why do we talk as if we are very interested in customer retention, but our marketing dollars and our efforts and resources really still go to acquisition? Well, I think there are 3 fundamental reasons for this. You can slice and dice this many ways. But the first one is that acquisition is really just frankly a lot of fun. You get to ring the bell, you get to pop the champagne cork, you get to celebrate how many new customers we have acquired, that type of thing. And it's easily attributable too, that you can say it came from this marketing campaign or it was this salesperson who closed the deal. Retention is much more difficult. I mean, how do you attribute a improvement in your customer retention rates to an individual? You can't, because it's spread out throughout the entire organization. And everybody has a role, as they say, in customer retention. The next thing is that I don't think people really believe that retention has such an impact on your business. And that's going to be the core of this presentation, is that I'm going to convince you that retention is the most important thing you can do to grow your business. And I hope you're convinced of that by the end of this, because if it is, then these other issues will take care of themselves. Now, the last part is that retention is really a long-term strategy. And frankly, we live in a short-term world. In a time when a chief marketing officer only lasts 42 months on average. Well, think about it. They come in. It takes them 6 months or a year to get things going, uh, and then now they're down to they got to deliver really fast. And frankly, it's a lot easier to pump up acquisition numbers than it is to improve retention. Improving retention is hard. It is difficult. If you want to pump up your acquisition numbers, there are a lot of strategies to do that. Some more short term than others, but it's possible just using marketing dollars. So what got me started on this was I created a mathematical model to simulate what happens with when you improve your customer retention. What's the growth rate actually look like? And so the Excel model is very boring to look at. It's just numbers as you might expect. So I created this little visual model to help us out. And in this model, we've got three businesses, all of which are essentially containers of customers, and each having the same market share. At this point, they've all got 30%, 33% of the market. At the top here, we have the new entrants, the new customers coming into the industry. Now, this doesn't apply to startups. Startups are different, but in the case of a mature industry with, at least in this model, a few large competitors and organic growth, let's just say, this model is very applicable, and there are a lot of businesses in that situation. Now, this does apply to even things like restaurants. It applies in a slightly different way, but this is still true for retail, for restaurants, for small businesses. We also have what I call a distributor. If a customer leaves company A, they have to go to either B or C. Now, there is a certain dropout rate, but the reality is that for, I've been a consumer of, some products for a long time, my whole life. And, cable TV, have used it forever, probably will use some form of cable connectivity for the rest of my life. Okay, so when I leave one company, I go to another. Now the question is, if there are three, as in this case, if I leave one, I'm going to go to one of the other two. And then the question is, what's the distribution? What percentage do B and C get of A's churnouts, of the defectors from A? Where do they go? Again, this would be an acquisition budget, but what we're going to look at, not only that, but we're going to look at the number that actually leave your business and what the impact is. Now, this is cyclical. We're going to do this in as a number of periods, so month or year or whatever. Now, if you are in an industry that has 1% churn per year, then acquisition may not be that important to you. But if you're in a normal industry that has any churn anywhere from 10 to 30% per year, then customer retention is hugely important to you. And that's what we're going to demonstrate here in a minute.
So here we have the simulation that I mentioned a few minutes ago. At the top, we have an organic growth rate currently set at 0. We have three firms, A, B, and C, splitting evenly a total customer base of 7,500. A has a 1.5% churn, B has 1, C has 1, and then they are distributing or sharing their churned customers evenly, which is unrealistic given these quite different churn rates. But for right now, we'll just leave it. And we're going to run this for 12 periods. So let's see what happens. We're going to run it, and as you would expect, the number of subscribers that A has declined. I mean, their churn rate is higher, no surprise. But let's see what happens. We'll run it again. After 2 years, they've dropped 3% market share. and it continues to go down. Now, if we run it continually, I mean, if just keep going and going, it will eventually bottom out at 25%. It will take a really long time, but they will eventually decline to a 25% market share. Now, let's reset and let's make this, give them a little bigger advantage even than we have. And we're going to say that they're going to win 60% of the subscribers that defect from the other two firms. Now, this is pretty unrealistic given their churn rate, and 1.5% relative to 1 to win 60% would be totally unexpected. But let's see what happens. So we're going to run the simulation, and this complete overperformance on acquisitions did not help. They still continue to decline. Now, certainly, if they were at 1.1%, the results would be different. So I've reset the number of subscribers again back to start. We still have our 60% win rate for firm A. The only difference is that we've lowered their churn rate to 1.1%. So let's run it now. And they do gain a little market share. 34, they go up, and they'll eventually flatten out. I mean, we're already out at 108 months, and they're 35% market share. So yes, if your churn rate is close enough, then you can certainly overachieve on acquisitions enough to grow the business, but it makes it really hard. All right, let's run just a couple more simulations. So here we are. I have reset everything. We're back to 28.2% market share. I've run it 48 periods, and now though I've reset the 1% or the 1.5% churn rate to 1%, simulating a re-emphasis and a reinvigoration of the firm's retention efforts. Now, let's run the simulation, and you will notice a couple of things. First of all, this 28.2% right up here. All right, run it the first time, we get an 0.8% market increase. Then we get a 0.7, and now it's down to a 0.6% market gain. And again, this makes sense. As we get closer to the 1/3 market share, our gains get smaller and smaller. Now, this is where, though, an acquisition makes a lot of sense because it can overcome that effect. Now, the problem, of course, is how do you overachieve on acquisition while also maintaining your base retention efforts? Okay, I've been going on and on about how this model works with zero organic growth rate. So I thought it was time to see what would happen here if we had now this is per period, so if we're running 12 periods as a year, this would be 3.6+% growth. So I've also given them an advantage of 60% of the growth. They capture this A. So what they're doing is they're swapping churn for acquisition. So let's run the simulation. And amazingly enough, they go down. So even though they're, and in fact, their actual subs go down. Although they're starting to gain back now. All right. After 96 periods, they've got a 25.9% market share, 2,600 customers versus the other two that have, the numbers as you see them, 44% for the company that had the 0.5% churn. So let's reset and let's just go nuts. Let's put this in at 100%. So they win everything. And here's your 3.6% growth rate per year. We're giving A all the advantages that we can. and we're going to run the simulation, and they still drop as far as market share goes. Now, their number of customers is going up, but they're still losing out market share. So what's happening here is they get 100% of the new entrants, but then because they're a high churn rate, all they do is they send them over to the other two businesses. And so that's about as far as I can go with this growth rate. Now we can pump it up. Let's reset and pump it up to, let's say there's a 1%. So a 12% growth per year, and maybe the results here will be different. And yeah, sure. So now, 1% growth per month. So 12% growth per year. Yes, if they get 100% of it, they will tend to outgrow. So there's some number in the middle here, and you could mathematically find it that says if our industry grows this amount, and if we can get 100% of the new entrants, then this is what happens. But all this is, you can mathematically define all this. So anyway, I thought we'd cover that organic growth situation. But as I've said before, the organic growth is more realistic for the types of business that we've been discussing. So we're going to run one additional simulation here. And in this case, I've reset everything, but the churn rate for A is 1.5%, the churn rate for B is 1, and for C, it's 0.5%. By now, I think you'll be able to predict what is going to happen. So as you might expect, A went down, B stayed about the same, and C went up. And so if we keep running it, B does decline a little bit, but these will eventually bottom out in the case of A, and will peak out in the case of C, and the results will be proportional to their churn rates. Now, whether or not there's organic growth does not affect things, and as we've seen earlier, some of the other levers that you can pull don't have a tremendous effect, particularly when the churn rates are so different. So the first task in any business is to retain your customers. Now, this works whether you have a churn rate equal to your competitors or not, meaning that you can gain market share on your competitors by lowering your churn rate or by increasing your customer retention. That's belaboring the obvious, but the effects are very powerful. And so the next time you take a look at how your marketing budget is distributed, please take this into consideration. So we've covered this subject in some fair detail, but the question is, what are the key takeaways here? What is it we want to learn from all this? And the first thing is that if your churn rate is getting worse, you will lose market share, and overachieving on acquisitions will probably not help. The second thing is, if your churn rate is improving, you'll gain market share, and your competitors really can't prevent it. The third item is, if your churn rate is higher than your competitors, your firm will have lower market share, almost inevitably. And the last item is that churn improvement is a long-term investment, but it has a tremendous impact. I hope you found this presentation interesting. More importantly, I hope that it piqued your interest enough to take a look at the resources you put into acquisition versus the resources you put into retention, and consider whether you'd be better off shifting some resources from acquisition to retention. Depends on, are you in a startup mode? Is your industry in a startup mode? Or are you in an industry that has been around for a while, that is pretty stable, has small, maybe just organic growth? If those are the cases, you really need to take a hard look at whether you're investing enough in retention versus acquisition. But again, I hope you found it interesting. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.